December 27, 2007. The city of Vijayawada in Andhra Pradesh was preparing to slip into the stillness of another winter night. College students crammed for exams, street vendors packed up their stalls, and hostels dimmed their lights, one by one. But at a quiet girls' hostel in Ibrahimpatnam, a silence far more chilling began to settle in. A hostel caretaker would stumble upon a sight no one should ever see. The battered, lifeless body of a bright 17-year-old girl. Her name was Ayesha Meera. What followed was a whirlwind of horror, headlines, and heartbreak. A nation outraged. A family broken. And a justice system questioned to its core. This is not just a story about a girl. This is the story of how her death uncovered something darker, not just a murder, but a mystery drowned in politics, power, and pain. This is the story of Ayesha Meera. Born in 1990 in Tenali, Andhra Pradesh, Ayesha Meera was her parents' pride and joy. Bright-eyed, soft-spoken, and strong-willed, she was more than just a good student, she was a poet in the making. She loved writing. Her diary overflowed with dreams, doodles, and verses about hope, heartbreak, and ambition. Those who knew her described her as deeply thoughtful, with a gentle smile that could light up the room. She had just taken her first steps into adulthood. Enrolled in a pharmacy course in Vijayawada, she had recently moved to the Sai Krishna Ladies' Hostel. A place she and her family believed would be safe. The hostel was modest, a 3-story building on the city's outskirts. Shared rooms, a common bathroom, curfews, and prayer time. Ayesha adjusted quickly. She made friends, called her parents often, and remained focused on her studies. But beneath her steady routine was a growing discomfort. Ayesha had begun noticing strange things. An uneasy feeling when she passed certain corridors. Whispers. Unfamiliar faces outside the hostel. She mentioned to a friend, in hushed words, that she didn't always feel safe. That the night watchman sometimes looked at her, strangely. But she never made a formal complaint. Maybe she didn't want to worry her family. Maybe she thought it would go away. Maybe she believed it was nothing. But it wasn't. It was a Thursday night. December 27, 2007. The last week of the year. Exams had ended. Most students were either home for the holidays or resting after a long semester. But not Ayesha Meera. She stayed back at the hostel, focusing on some pending coursework. Her parents, who lived a few hours away in Tenali, had spoken to her earlier that evening. Everything seemed normal. She had dinner in the common area. Chatted briefly with 2 girls. Then, she walked back to her room, a small, single-cot space with pastel walls and a tiny study table. And then, Ayesha Meera disappeared from the pages of the living world. What happened between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. is a black hole. A terrifying mystery. But what emerged in the early hours of December 28 was enough to paralyze a city. At approximately 5:30 a.m., the hostel warden, an elderly woman named Mary, went to check the ground floor bathrooms after a resident complained about a leaking tap. She approached the locked washroom door. It wouldn't open. At first, she thought someone had simply fallen asleep inside. But when she peeked through the narrow partition at the bottom of the door, there it was, a foot. Lifeless. Pale. Panic erupted. Within minutes, the police were called. Students were huddled outside in blankets. Some crying. Some too shocked to speak. And inside that small bathroom lay Ayesha Meera. Her clothes torn. Blood pooled beneath her head. A bottle of hair oil shattered nearby. Her salwar tied around her neck like a noose. There was writing on the bathroom wall. In Telugu. Crudely scribbled in red ink. She was talking too much. That's why I killed her. A signature followed. Just a single word. Psycho. The scene was chaotic. Officers roped off the hostel. Forensic teams arrived. Students were interrogated. Parents were informed. Ayesha's parents received the news over the phone. They couldn't believe it. Their daughter, who just last night had wished them good night, was now a cold, covered body on a hostel floor. The autopsy confirmed what many feared. Ayesha had been sexually assaulted. Her skull bore blunt force trauma marks. She had fought back, fiercely. There were bruises on her knuckles, scratch marks on her arms. December 28, 2007. By sunrise, Ibrahimpatnam wasn't just a town anymore, it was the center of national attention. Outside the Sai Krishna hostel, news vans lined the narrow lanes. Cameras flashed. Reporters whispered theories. Police roamed with notepads and walkie-talkies. Inside the hostel, it was pure chaos. Terrified students packed their bags. Parents rushed to collect their daughters. Trust was broken. Who could sleep peacefully in a place where a girl was raped and murdered, right under their roof? The hostel's owner, a man named Rami Reddy, tried to distance himself. He claimed ignorance. The management insisted they had done their best. But the students? They told a different story. The night watchman used to drink. We complained about him before. There was no CCTV. The gate was always left half open. Rumors fed the fire. Some said powerful politicians visited the hostel late at night. Others whispered that Ayesha had confronted someone. Someone big. Theories ran wild. But amidst the storm, the police promised swift justice. Within 48 hours, they claimed to have found their suspect. Enter Satyam Babu. A 19-year-old with neurological issues, including partial paralysis. He couldn't walk fast. He couldn't climb stairs easily. But somehow, the police said, he scaled the hostel walls, entered quietly, assaulted Ayesha, and left without being seen. Impossible? Maybe. But they had their man. Or so they claimed. Ayesha's family was devastated. But they weren't convinced. Her parents knew something didn't add up. Why were police rushing? Why no answers about missing CCTV footage? Why was Satyam, a man who could barely walk, being painted as a cold-blooded killer? Protests erupted. Human rights activists raised red flags. They questioned the investigation, called it hasty, even lazy. But their voices were drowned in a system that wanted to move on. Meanwhile, Ayesha was buried in her hometown. Wrapped in white. A martyr of a story that hadn't even begun to be told properly. They said her soul cried for justice. But few were listening. It didn't take long. Within 2 days of Ayesha Meera's murder, the police claimed to have cracked the case. They paraded their suspect P. Satyam Babu. He was from a small village in Krishna district. Young. Poor. Afflicted by a rare neurological disorder, Guillain-Barré syndrome. He limped. His right leg dragged. His left hand trembled. But now, he was the psycho who raped and murdered a 17-year-old girl in a locked hostel. How did he climb over the compound wall? How did he overpower a young, healthy girl? How did no one hear anything? The police had an answer for everything. He was cunning. He used a hidden route. He was mentally unstable. Case closed. But the evidence? Almost all of it was circumstantial. No fingerprints. No DNA match. No eyewitnesses. Just a confession, allegedly extracted under duress. Satyam Babu's lawyer screamed foul. His family protested. Activists demanded an impartial inquiry. But the system had shifted gears. The case went to trial. The prosecution painted Satyam as a sexual deviant. They brought in two vague witnesses, neither of whom could identify him clearly. But the court listened. In 2010, Satyam Babu was sentenced to life imprisonment. Just like that, the chapter was closed. At least, on paper. But on the streets, in homes, and most of all, in Ayesha's family, the questions never stopped echoing. Why wasn't the hostel CCTV working that night? Why wasn't Rami Reddy, the hostel owner, interrogated seriously? Why did some officers say there were signs of political pressure? And most importantly, who was protecting whom? In 2011, a letter surfaced. Anonymous. Handwritten. It alleged that a powerful politician's relative had visited the hostel that night. That Ayesha had caught him in an inappropriate act, and threatened to complain. The letter claimed she was silenced. That the crime scene had been tampered with. That the writing on the wall was planted. Investigative journalists tried digging deeper. One retired officer even admitted off the record that the case was shut too fast. And Satyam Babu? He was rotting in jail. For a crime he physically, medically, could not have committed. But the police refused to budge. They stood by their story. Until a twist no one saw coming. Years passed. Satyam Babu sat inside the walls of a prison, serving a sentence for a crime many believed he could never have committed. His body was deteriorating. His condition worsened. But the fight for justice, his justice, had only just begun. Human rights activists, medical professionals, and journalists began examining the case with renewed urgency. They reviewed every report, every statement, every piece of so-called evidence. And what they found was damning. Satyam had a proven medical history of Guillain-Barré syndrome, a neurological condition that made it extremely difficult for him to walk unaided, let alone commit a brutal rape and murder, scale a compound wall, and escape undetected. Even the Andhra Pradesh State Human Rights Commission raised questions. If the accused couldn't walk properly, how had he committed the crime? Why had his confession been taken without a lawyer? Why was the evidence so flimsy? Satyam's mother, a poor farm laborer, became a voice for her son. She traveled village to village, holding a photograph of him, begging people to listen. Legal aid groups stepped in. They appealed the conviction. Demanded a retrial. And slowly, finally, the case began to turn. Why was the DNA report never made public? Why was the handwriting expert's report on the bathroom wall note buried? In 2011, a team of independent lawyers and medical examiners petitioned the court to reinvestigate. They argued that Satyam Babu had been framed, a convenient scapegoat in a politically sensitive case. In 2012, a ray of hope appeared. The Andhra Pradesh High Court agreed to review the case. For the first time, doubt was formally acknowledged. Statements were re-examined. Timelines were questioned. And then came the moment of truth. In March 2017, a full 10 years after Ayesha Meera's murder, the High Court of Andhra Pradesh delivered a verdict that stunned the nation. Satyam Babu was found not guilty. His conviction was overturned. He was acquitted of all charges. The court made a chilling observation, that the police had likely framed an innocent man to shield the real killer. That key evidence was suppressed, that procedures were violated, and that justice had been denied not just to Satyam, but to Ayesha Meera too. 10 years in prison. For a crime he didn't commit. 10 years stolen from a man already battling his body. 10 years of silence, screams, and survival. Satyam Babu walked out of prison with tears in his eyes and nothing in his hands. No apology. No compensation. Just the remains of a life the system had nearly erased. But what about Ayesha? With Satyam cleared, the case was now back to square one. No suspect. No trial. No justice. And what about the real killer? Had they been protected all along? Were they still W? April 2017. While Satyam Babu stepped out of prison a free man, Ayesha Meera's case, once again, had no face. No arrest. No closure. But something had changed. 10 years of silence had finally turned into noise. Loud, unapologetic noise. Students across Andhra Pradesh began holding candlelight marches. Lawyers formed pressure groups. Social media exploded with hashtags demanding a reinvestigation. Because now, people weren't just asking who killed Ayesha. They were also asking, who protected the killer? Activists flooded the streets. Posters of Ayesha's face, painted with slogans like, "She deserves truth," and "Stop framing the innocent," were plastered outside police stations and court buildings. TV debates raged. Politicians deflected. And the people, they kept shouting. Why did the police rush to close the case? Why wasn't the politician's relative ever questioned? Who tampered with the crime scene? Under pressure, the government finally responded. The case would be reopened. A fresh team, a Special Investigation Team, or SIT, was formed. New eyes. New voices. New hope. But hope isn't always enough. Ayesha Meera's parents, by now aging and tired, stood on the steps of the High Court and begged for only one thing, truth. But months passed. Then years. And no fresh arrests were made. The SIT report, if it existed, was never made public. Protests slowly quieted. The outrage turned into whispers. And whispers turned into silence. But her parents, they never gave up. They filed repeated RTIs, right to information requests, asking for updates. They wrote to the president. They begged the chief minister. They held on to Ayesha's diary, her college ID, her favorite pen, and waited. Ayesha's father once said, "I go to sleep every night hoping her killer dreams of her face." They turned down government compensation. They didn't want money. They wanted a name. The system gave them headlines, ceremonies, and sympathy. But it never gave them the truth. Every year on December 27th, her family holds a small vigil. They light candles near her photo. They pray. And they wait. Sometimes, journalists come. Sometimes, they don't. But the family shows up. Every single year. Because to them, Ayesha isn't just a victim. She's a promise. A promise they made to her soul, that they'll never stop. March 31, 2017, a historic day in Andhra Pradesh High Court. In courtroom number 3, as the judge entered and the room settled, a silence fell heavy over everyone. After 10 years of confusion, allegations, and buried truths, justice was finally being rewritten. This court finds that Satyam Babu was wrongfully convicted. The investigation lacked procedural fairness. Evidence was either suppressed or manipulated. The real culprit has not been brought to book. A line that echoed far beyond the court walls, the real culprit has not been brought to book. The room didn't erupt with cheers. There were no celebrations. Only shock. And heartbreak. Because this wasn't just about freeing an innocent man. It was about something darker. Something that had always lingered in the background, that someone powerful had silenced Ayesha, and the system had helped them. The judge didn't stop at the verdict. He ordered the government to pay Satyam Babu 1 Indian rupee lakh in compensation for his wrongful conviction. But the question stood like a ghost in the room. Can 10 years of life be measured in 1 lakh rupees? The judge also made one thing clear: the police had failed. Miserably. And intentionally. A fresh investigation was recommended. A new probe to find the actual murderer. Public reactions exploded once again. Twitter trends. Newspaper columns. Debates on primetime TV. But behind all the outrage, one truth remained: Ayesha Meera's killer was still free. And perhaps, still protected. The special investigation. It was launched. But its results were, conveniently delayed. Quietly buried under bureaucratic excuses. To this day, no fresh suspect has been named. No new trial. No confession. Nothing. All that's left are fragments. The bathroom with broken tiles. The wall with scribbled lies. A hostel that now holds only ghosts. And in Tenali, two aging parents still waiting. Every time the doorbell rings, Ayesha's father once said, "I wish it was someone bringing us the truth." But the truth is quiet. And the system is louder. Ayesha Meera was just 17. A girl who loved poetry. A girl who wanted to become a pharmacist. A girl who had dreams, and a diary full of verses that now read like farewells. On a winter night in 2007, someone crushed all of that. Violently. Silently. Brutally. And in the years that followed, our systems crushed something else: the truth. What happened inside that hostel bathroom? Who wrote that message on the wall? Who erased the CCTV tapes? Who watched from behind the curtain, and said nothing? Was it a stranger? Or someone powerful? Someone the police didn't dare to touch? Someone shielded by connections and covered by lies? They can't kill my voice. I'll write forever. A line found in Ayesha's notebook. But her voice was killed. Not just by the killer, but by the silence that followed. A silence we all became a part of. And now, nearly 2 decades later, this case still has no answer. No closure. Only questions that burn louder with each passing year. So we ask you, the listener, the viewer, the citizen, not to forget Ayesha Meera. Not to forget Satyam Babu. Not to forget the injustice that walked in daylight while justice remained locked behind red tape. Her story isn't just a crime story. It's a mirror. Of what happens when power meets silence. Of what justice looks like, when it's too late. This was the story of Ayesha Meera. And her fight is still not over.